welcome back. It's the Moving Story Show again, and it's Louisa Munson from Good Morning Portugal. And this week I'm bringing a wonderful interview with a good pal called Jennie Lowes. Now, you might have come across Jennie before because I've interviewed her on my other channels, and I know Carl has also interviewed Jennie as well. So, Jennie came to our attention a couple of years ago, actually. She was doing a really great podcast, actually, on kind of mainstream radio. With Richie Allen, and we really loved her, and then we found out she actually lived not that far away, and so we got to know her. She has had a really massive load of experience with the NHS in the UK, and then quite some time ago she moved over here to Portugal. She's worked as a recruiter for the NHS before really having a bit of a turning point in terms of healthcare. And Jennie now actually runs her own business called Genius, or genius.life. It's www.genius.life. And she's an integrative health practitioner. So like Jennie can look through your health expectations and run tests and all sorts. I mean, she's really, really good at what she does. Anyway, Jennie's here because she's got this really broad experience of being an expat. So she has, she moved over with her husband and her really two small boys. During that time, she's separated. She's raised her boys, or is raising her boys. They're going through school right now. And so she's got this experience of what it's like to raise children and integrate them within the main system of Portugal. She's also, bought a house, sold a house, and is now building a home. She's bought some land, and so she's doing that as well. And obviously she set up a business, and she works remotely and helps people get healthier. So let's bring on Jennie now. Okay, so let's get going. So thanks again, Jennie, for agreeing to sit down and chat with me about migration, because it's your 11th anniversary tomorrow, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yeah.
A cycle in Portugal.
Yeah, that's incredible. So tell me, if I can take you back 11 years or, maybe beyond that, what was it that first made you think, actually, I want to emigrate or I want to move? Were you actually in the UK at the time before you came?
Yeah, I was. So it probably started because a friend of ours, with my then partner, the father of my children, a friend of ours had said to us, out of all the people that I would have expected to have moved out of Spalding, which is where I was from, a little sleepy town in Lincolnshire, it would have been you two. And it kind of started to get us thinking a little bit. And my parents had an apartment here at the time in San Martino. So we'd been across a few times on holiday with my eldest child at the time. And then I found out I was pregnant just before we were coming over again to have a holiday. And we were looking in the estate agent windows, and we saw a plot of land that we could afford if we were able to sell our house and then try and raise some funds. So we were already, we'd had a mortgage for quite a long time, and we were like double income, no kids for a long time. So we'd paid off quite a lot of our mortgage, and we'd already renovated 2 houses. So at that point we had quite a good lump sum to come out with. So we started looking into it that way. And it's funny because my mum, she's travelled all over, but when she first came to Portugal, when her feet hit the ground, she felt like she'd come home. And I felt a little bit like that about Portugal too. So I've travelled quite extensively, and I've never felt quite so grounded as I do here in Portugal. So it just felt like it was the right thing to do. And I was working as a nurse at the time. My oldest was 3, probably around 3. And I would have to get him up really early in the morning to take him to the childminder. And then I wouldn't see him for 13 hours, or sometimes it'd be 2 days, because he'd be in bed by the time I got back. And the only time I'd see him would be first thing in the morning as I was rushing around trying to get him ready to go to work. And when I found out I was pregnant with my second, I just thought, I can't do that with 2. It's just, 1, it's hard enough, but with 2, it's going to be really difficult. So it kind of, we didn't even think about it too much, because I think if we'd have thought about it more, we probably would have delayed our plans, but we just rushed on into it. I found out I was pregnant, put the house on the market. We'd been offered a bridging loan from family to buy the plot of land that already had planning permission on it. And then we decided, okay, well, with the money that we earned from selling the house, we'll see if we can afford to build. And we could actually. And in those days, the exchange rate was much better. And also construction prices and land prices were much cheaper. So we were able to do it with a little bit of help from family. So we didn't really consider it too much. It was just like, yeah, let's go, let's try it and let's see what happens. And I was getting maternity pay for 9 months when I had Sasha through the NHS, and it's quite decent maternity pay. So I knew that for a few months we could be okay, and then we'd have to try and find a living here.
Wow, what a challenge.
Yeah, and it was quite a whirlwind as well, because we'd spotted a plot that was near Nazaré, and we had this idea to put yurts on it, and we were going to run a tourism adventure. And but then the estate agent was a little bit shifty, and we didn't end up buying that plot. We were very close to signing. We didn't end up buying that plot, but we ended up finding a better one. And in my experience, was a better location for us than being over sort of towards Nazaré. Being this way towards Caldash was much more suited to us as a family. So it kind of just all fell into place, really.
And so how long did it take then from like the first idea, like from your friend saying, you know, I thought you guys would have been the first out of here, to actually setting foot on your land?
Probably 9 months.
Wow.
It was pretty fast.
So like you gave birth to that as well?
Yeah, exactly. Because when I was like packing up the house ready to leave, we had a cat and the 2 children, and Ruben, my partner at the time, was still working up till quite late. So I remember packing all the boxes thinking, what are we doing? Like, I have a tiny baby here and a 3-year-old. We don't speak the language. But we didn't really like think on that too much. It was kind of like, no, we're young, we can find work, we can do what will make it work. And it was very much that attitude, which was quite surprising, because I'm okay taking risks, like as long as I understand the risks and benefits. But my ex-partner is a bit more risk averse. So he also went along with the momentum as well, and we didn't worry too much about it. And I think it really helped that I knew that my parents and family had a link here as well, so that from that side I wouldn't be kind of isolated, because they were coming here quite a lot, and my parents still come here probably every 6 weeks. My mum not so much anymore. My dad comes probably every 8 to 8 weeks. So and my family come for holidays, so I still get to see them as much as I probably did before, actually more probably than I did before.
That's a great result, isn't it? Because, you know, for a lot of people that's a big concern for them. It is, you know, who am I going to leave behind, and when will I see them? How often will I see them? So that's great. So you guys arrive, and you've got that kind of youthful excitement about the possibility of life. How long did that sort of high, that new arrival high, last for before something else came in? And what else came in? Was it, you know, like for us, it was a bit of a realism crept up, and we came across a fire and thought, oh my goodness, what are we doing here? But what was your next step?
Well, we were very lucky that when we first moved over, we stayed at my mum and dad's apartment at the time, so we didn't have to worry too much about paying rent or anything like that. Great. Just needed to feed ourselves and oversee the build. And by overseeing the build, we managed to kind of save ourselves some money and things like that. We did have an engineer as well who helped us. And then probably about 9 months in, I started to think, now, once my maternity pay had finished, I thought, now I really need to start to look at earning some money. And the most sensible option for me was to think about doing what I'd always done, which was nursing. So I looked at the possibility of like working in the health service and things like that. But then the salary for nurses here isn't very good, and I'd be back to working, you know, shifts and full time again, and for very little pay. So I went through the process of getting my nursing license here, and that took a lot longer than I thought it was going to do, and it was quite complicated. But I luckily had made a very good friend who was also a lawyer, and she helped me through all that process. So I started advertising myself once I got the registration with the nursing body here. I started advertising myself as nursing services, doing dressings, injections, like post-operative care, things like that. And what happened was it wasn't very consistent. So I'd have some weeks where I had quite a few clients, and then I could go weeks without having anybody else. And I was also working on my own. So if I wanted to provide like at-home care, I'd really need other people to help me too. So that kind of was a bit of a reality check. And during that period, I started cleaning, and I was working for $6.50 an hour and cleaning holiday lets and things like that. So that kept us like ticking over, really. And then my Ruben at the time, he was doing some taxi driving and things like that, like picking people up from the airports. But that was kind of a realization when the money started running out, because we were obviously having to pay the builders. But I think the biggest thing was we had a dispute with our carpenter that did our carpentry work on the build. And he did a really bad job, and we had to put his work right. And we decided to withhold some money from him. We didn't pay him the full amount. And then he took us to court. So we went through the whole court process. We tried to mediate, but he wouldn't mediate. And we had to go to court, and we lost. But luckily, we'd kept that money kind of to one side. And we paid him, obviously, but it caused quite a lot of stress. But what happened in the meantime was our lawyer hadn't informed us that we had a set date to pay the amount that the judge had ordered that we'd order. And I was working doing something different then, and I was off somewhere in Portugal. And I got a frantic phone call from Ruben, and the bailiffs had basically turned up at the house.
Oh, no.
And it was the lawyer's fault because she hadn't informed us. And like I said, the money was there, so it wasn't like we weren't going to pay it. And that was very, very stressful, particularly for him with the two kids there. And, you know, lawyers were there and the bailiffs and everything. So we managed to get that all solved. But going through that process, not being able to speak the language very well, certainly was a really like a wake-up call to, you know, there are struggles here. It's not all fruity and light and, you know, going out for lunch and drinking wine. There's some, you have to kind of really function. And it's quite difficult doing that when you don't speak the language. So, yeah, that was probably the biggest wake-up call then. And there's been more since, you know, that I've thought. And most of the time it is around language. And I speak a decent level of Portuguese. It's not great by any standards, but I can converse now. But 5 years ago or 6 years ago, or when we arrived, it was like nothing, next to nothing. And I took lessons and I've practiced a lot. But it's a very hard language to master for sure, especially for us Brits, I think, where we're not speaking many languages isn't that habitual to us.
Yeah, and also, like if somebody sees you and thinks something about you doesn't seem quite Portuguese, they just start speaking in English, and then it's impossible, isn't it? So language then, how did you crack the language in the end to get to conversational that you're at?
I don't know if I've cracked it.
But you feel confident enough now?
Well, my language has definitely improved because I have a Portuguese partner, and he's obviously got a big family. And also recently, since we've moved, I have just one neighbour, and she doesn't speak any English at all. So we spend quite a lot of time with each other now. And I'm always going over to hers, and she comes to see me. And I'm definitely learning more just by practicing and speaking it. So I don't think I don't think I've cracked it, because it's a very difficult language to crack. Because quite often when I'm having conversations with my partner, I'll say to him, what's the word for that in Portuguese? And there's like 5 different words that you could use in different circumstances, depending what you're talking about and things like that. So there's always going to be a bit of a restriction on fluidity of language. And I actually think that is language is a very integral part of expressing yourself, isn't it?
Yeah.
I feel like people didn't probably or don't get a real impression of me when I'm trying to speak to them in Portuguese. it's almost like I'm a different person because I can't express myself like I would in English.
Yeah.
And that can be quite frustrating. You know, I've had quite a few situations where I know that I'd have been able to have dealt with things much better if I was in my native tongue, or if I spoke better Portuguese. But the last few years has improved quite a lot. And the kids, they speak fluent Portuguese, of course. So sometimes they all speak to each other. They speak to each other in Portuguese. So I hear more. But there's lots of slang, like Portuguese as well. And they shorten words a lot, and words blend into another. So I'm quite good if I'm one-on-one with somebody and they don't speak any English. I can get by. I find it more difficult if I know the person can speak English, because it's easy to revert to English. I'll be with my partner's mum, for example. She speaks English, but we start talking in Portuguese, and then at some point I go back into English because I can't find the way to describe it like I want to. So it's a bit of a cop-out, really, but I do try.
Bless you. Oh, that's intense. I mean, I lived in France for 5 years and I got quite fluent in French. But at that time, I wasn't working from home. I was working out and about with French people, and that really makes a huge difference. You need to interact. But you're right, you can't express yourself. It is like you have a different personality. In fact, I notice my voice is much lower when I speak in French. And so that creates a completely different understanding of who you are. It's quite incredible, really. And you can play with it, can't you?
Yeah, definitely, for sure. And once I heard a saying, which was every person you interact with, whether it's just walking past them on the street or it's on the telephone, or has a different version of you formed in their head.
Yeah.
And that, I think that's very pertinent when you're talking about language, because I know that I could probably joke around with people a bit more. And, you know, people that you see day to day that don't really speak English, if it was in my native tongue, they could get to know me better and vice versa. But that is a barrier for sure. But also on the other sense, you rely much more on how the other person, like their energy is, rather than what they're actually speaking.
Yeah.
So I think it teaches you too.
And I think you have to probably be more honest or get to the point. I know with my French personality, I'm a lot more straightforward, because I can't create these really long sentences like I do in English, you know, because you just have to get to the point, you know, A to B. Interesting. Wow. So, I mean, it's interesting that you're one of these expats, like I am, and obviously Carl is, you know, that we've come over and we've had to work. We've had to be able to create our own way to live. For the first 5 years we've been here, it's only really in the last 6 months it feels like we've actually got on our feet. And when I say we've got on our feet, it just feels like we're touching the ground. It's not like we're really fully grounded, but it feels like we've come up for air and we can go. It feels like some of that was panic in the last 5 years. So how did you move from that first feeling of getting back on your feet to more integration? Like, tell me more about your journey.
So things changed in a quite positive manner for me around 2000. And so we moved here in 2011. I'm just going to let my dog out.
Sure.
She's crying.
Bless her.
Sorry. So about 2013, the nursing wasn't bringing in much of an income. So I started looking at other things to do, and I realized that they were recruiting a lot of Portuguese nurses to go and work in the UK. So I put out a few CVs to some recruitment companies, and one of them took my CV and said, "Can you meet us next week? We're in Coimbra." So I went up on the train to meet the owner of this company, and it was a very new recruitment company that had just started, and they were looking for a nurse like manager to interview nurses and also to oversee like the interview processes. So I landed on my feet totally, where I got a regular good monthly salary, and I got expenses like internet paid and my phone paid and things like that. So we went from a period of it being very difficult and worrying about where our income was going to come from, to being quite settled. But what it meant was I was stuck in the office, in my office. I worked from home. It was quite flexible. I could like have my own workload and work around it. But I was also traveling a lot. So I started to travel all through Europe and then later on to India as well. So that happened. And then during the kind of beginning of COVID, I was still working in the recruitment company, but it had actually started to tail off quite a lot anyway, because the nursing registration had introduced new language requirements for nurses. And it was very hard. Even the Portuguese nurses that spoke really good English were struggling to achieve the level that they needed. So we were going from recruiting quite a few nurses every month to hardly any out of Portugal and Europe, and everything went kind of non-EU. But it started to tail off. The money started from the NHS end, they started to tail down, and one by one the company was getting smaller and smaller, and there was actually only 3 of us left. At one point it was 25 of us, and there was just 3 of us. And I was getting a bit depressed with getting up every day and like having to really force my work, and it wasn't flowing like it, and I wasn't enjoying it so much. So in the meantime, I'd taken some extra courses, and then in June 2020 I just decided, now that's it, now I'm going on my own and I'm going to do something completely different. And that's when I started with nutrition and the integrative health and doing that instead. And I'm still finding my feet with that. Every week gets better and better and better, but I don't advertise as much as I should. I'd like to have much more local clients, because at the moment most of mine are online, but it does fit in with my life, and you know, the kids keep me pretty busy, to be honest. And now we're doing another build. So
yeah, thank you for like agreeing to speak, you know, while you are sort of doing a build. I mean, that's a pretty big,
yeah, that's why I'm in a bird box.
It looks like a lovely bird box. I really like the sterling board finishing. I'd love an office that's sterling board. There's something really warm about it. I love it.
Yeah, it is. The whole place is, apart from the bathroom, the whole place is like this. So I like it, but it's a bit rustic, but I like it.
Yeah. So yeah, what I'm hearing, like in terms of like creating your career, you've got quite a few strings that you could pull on if you needed extra cash or extra like fluidity with when it comes to money, because you've got your new thing that really reflects who you are. And that's, I think, one of the great things about being in another country. It does help you reinvent yourself, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And then you could still nurse, couldn't you?
Yeah.
I mean, do you find that you do a lot of stuff with expats or sort of like migrants? Special jobs, because there are quite a, you know, we're not the typical kind of migrants to Portugal necessarily, are we? Lots of people who come here are coming for retirement and to make their pensions go a bit further.
Yeah, most of my local clients are expats.
Yeah.
But then online they come from all over the world, but they're usually like English speaking, but not always. They could be from all over Europe, or I had a client in Australia that was Portuguese, for example. So they come from all over, but I'd love to have more Portuguese clients, but again, the language is a barrier to that. So, you know, I think there would be a lot of want for my services from the Portuguese community, but I would either need to speak a very high level of Portuguese, or the person would have to speak a very high level of English. So I'm a little bit restricted in that. But there's definitely much more I can do, like to push my work. But at the moment, so 2 years ago, we sold a house, and that gave me a bit of a cushion. And then I've just sold another house that I renovated after the separation with my ex. And then, so that's given me a little bit of a cushion again. So I don't have to push my work too much. It can just tick over. But I'm busy enough, you know. Yeah. But I always have something to do.
Yes, of course you do. I mean, you're in demand, aren't you? In terms of, you know, you've obviously got a bit of a lust for life, you know, and you're a bit of a mover and a shaker, aren't you? So I love that.
Yeah. Depending on what part of the moon cycle it is, I think.
Yeah, very much like me.
Yeah.
So
Sometimes I have lots of enthusiasm and drive, and other times I'm just like, I'm just going to take it easy today.
yeah. Okay, this is a little bit of a stop moment. Let's have a little pause, because in a minute you're going to learn a little bit more about one of Jennie's key turning points since she's been in Portugal. But before you do that, I just want you to consider for a moment what you might do in terms of if you're having a turning point in terms of moving to Portugal, because it's a huge thing to emigrate, to leave one country behind and then come over and set up home in a new place. And that's why Carl and I have both got our businesses. So Carl, with Good Morning Portugal, he also runs something called the Portugal Club, which I can also help out in as well. And in that, we provide weekly video support meetings. And like currently we have a few people that meet up on a video conference. We meet up once a week. Carl is leading that, and it's an opportunity to talk about the sensitive issues, your concerns, the things you just almost want to get off your chest and share within a like-minded group. And trust me, these are really, really supportive little protocols, because it gives you the chance to realize that you're really normal in worrying about things and wanting a little bit of support, but it's almost like a problem shared is a problem halved. It gives you the opportunity to work things through for yourself. And then I also run something called the Astrological Migration Plan. So as you might know, I'm an astrologer and a coach. And so I work with people also in migration, but from an astrological or planetary perspective, where I can look at you and your partner, you and your family, and look out for the right timings for your move, the right places for your move, and also help you through some of the big psychological changes that you might go through. So for instance, looking through your charts to find out when you might be going through grief or sort of principles of change, so that you can start to build your migration timeline in tune with the moon. So anyway, they are the two things that we help you with. You can find out about the Portugal Club through the Good Morning Portugal website, which is goodmorningportugal.com, or you could go directly to theportugalclub.com. And for the astrological migration plan, just go to feelgoodastrology.com/migration. Anyway, let's bring Jennie back on, shall we? So in terms, like, obviously you've had lots to manage and lots to be on the go with. Lots of people that come over don't come over with small children, let alone a 3-month-old baby. We did one of our moves with a 3-month-old baby. That was very, very stressful for me, I have to say. How have you been able to manage health? Like, did you notice much of a change in health because of like inherent stress and things like that?
Yes, but at the time I wasn't really sure, or wasn't really associating it with the stress. I think it was more to do with the lifestyle that I adopted when we first came here. So, red wine is very cheap and plentiful. I didn't drink coffee before I came here, and then I started to drink coffee. And we used to eat out quite a lot as well, because it's quite cheap to eat out here, isn't it? And often they're very greasy, fatty meals and
granny's cooking, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah, but not like 3 times a week or something like that. And I started to get a lot of indigestion and heartburn, and it was resolved by lifestyle changes. But I had to go for an endoscopy, and that experience of going for an endoscopy here, from observing endoscopies in the UK, was quite shocking to me. And from that moment on, I kind of decided that no, I have to really take responsibility for my own health, because I do not want to be sick here. Because there were, there's some definite things here that happen that shouldn't. Like the endoscopy was, usually with an endoscopy, you go to like a day surgery unit to have the endoscopy done. You might have sedation, or you might not have sedation. And they treat it as if like almost you're going in for an operation. You have a checklist, you get put in a gown. It's all very smooth. And I got to the hospital. I had to sit and wait. They gave me a tablet that I had to take, but I wasn't allowed to take any water with it. It's like, well, how can't? So I kept trying to swallow this tablet down. And in the end, I had to hide water behind her. I could drink it. And it was to do with checking the motility of the stomach. And then the doctor came out. I had to wait for ages. The doctor came out and he called me in, and we went into this tiny like broom cupboard.
Mm.
And I remember I had like big boots on, winter boots on. And I said, do you want me to take my shoes off to get onto them? And he said, no, leave everything like it is. And I'm like, what? Am I not even going to have a gown or anything put on? And then he came over with the scope, and it had gel on the end of the scope. And he was like, right, put your head back and swallow. And he tried to get me to swallow the scope with only local anesthetic gel around the top. So, of course, I was gagging like anything. And on the third attempt, with tears running down my eyes, I said to him, I remembered, and I said, haven't you got any spray you can numb my throat with? And he was like, spray? I don't know what you're talking about, spray. And then he went, oh, yes, we have some spray. And then he went, and then the endoscopy passed straight down. But if I hadn't known that there was such a thing of spray for him to be able to spray my throat to put it down, then I'd have probably had to have endured that for another, 10 minutes or something like that. And if I'd have wanted anaesthetic, I'd have had to have come back on another day. So, I've had some experiences like that, but I've also had some positive experiences with the health service when the kids have been sick. So, I've seen both sides. There are some things that are very good about the health service here, but the organisation is not great, and it very quickly strains under pressure, for sure.
Yes.
But so health-wise, as you know, I've taken a very alternative route now. Mm. And I haven't had to have much dealings with the health service recently, quite a few years now, really. So there is definitely a gap. And there's definitely a gap between hospital and community care. There's a big lack in community care. So say you have an operation and you need your dressing changing in 5 days. You have to go to the health service to get that dressing changed.
Right.
In a waiting room. And, you might have had major surgery and only got out a few days before. Where in England, the community nurses would come to you, or the district nurses would come to you. And it's the same like palliative care as well in the community. It's not really there. So there are some big gaps. And when I was doing like purely the nursing stuff and not just the integrative health, that's actually what a lot of my calls were about, were that people wanted to die at home.
Yeah. They
wanted input at home. And that's just not there usually. You either are in hospital or you're at home with nothing.
Wow.
As you know, in England, we've got Macmillan nurses, palliative care nurses that work in the community, health visitors, but they don't really have that here. So there is a definite gap.
Mm. Yeah. And one you're sort of like qualified to really consider, isn't it? I mean, you could really make a difference here.
But to do that, to do that service, I need a team. I can't just do it on my own, because people don't have a clock when they're ill. It's 24/7, 7 days a week. And actually, when I was doing the nursing services, I got called out on Christmas Day, one Christmas. And I didn't have anybody else that could then follow that up. So I was out Christmas Day, Boxing Day, the day after. I was out every day doing something. So I've thought about creating an agency here, like a nursing agency, but I'm going down my other route now because it's more logistically possible, really.
Yeah. And really what's come up there, I think, is like there's almost like a piece of collaboration that's needed, isn't there? Like, because when you've been in a country for a certain period of time, we all come up with ideas. We all know the sort of migrant who comes and says, I don't like this must change, this isn't how we do it back home. But then there's this kind of tempered wisdom that emerges after years and after sort of trying to at least seek to understand where we are before like chucking our 2 pennyworth in. And then there's that sort of like tempered wisdom that comes with experience and a real genuine need to want to add something. And I wonder how the communities can all work together. What do you think is the role of a migrant when they are like living in another country? I mean, I've lived in a few different countries and I'm still not entirely sure. I'm wondering, what do you think of the actual idea of country identity these days? Is the whole idea of nationality easing off and dissolving, because we can pretty much work anywhere we want now.
Yeah, I think there's still a very solid traditional base of way of living here in Portugal.
Yeah.
That it looks like that's starting to move away now.
Yeah.
And people are not so rooted as they used to be. But the traditions still hang around. COVID probably disrupted a few of those traditions, you know, the festas and all that kind of thing. They stopped for a while, but they've started up with a vengeance again.
I know, they're great.
All the festas that celebrate, you know, the soup and onions and stuff like that, they've all started back up again. But the role as I think my role as a migrant is to be a valuable member of society, and I try to do that even if my language sometimes gets in the way. So, and to honor the traditions and respect the traditions that exist in the country and not try and change things. I think we have to accept with dignity the things that we can't change, because they're only going to drive us mad. And I don't have a huge amount of contact with the expat community. I have some very good expat friends and I have some clients, but I don't kind of move in those circles, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do.
But I know there are a lot of people that come here and they get frustrated with things that they can't change. And yes, there is a lot of frustration sometimes, but we have to also remember that those things are also the things that we love about the country.
Yeah.
So what I love about Portugal is very laid back attitude towards things. The way they celebrate and love food and family so much is so, you know, so rooted in them. And also how in contact they are with their environment, you know, with the outdoors and nature. And it's not so concrete, like a concrete jungle, like some of our cities are in the UK. And even like in Lisbon, there's a really nice cosmopolitan feel about it. And there's a lot of creativity and purity, I find, here in Portugal. Not everywhere, because we've had problems sometimes, like last week with the hunter. But there are things that, you know, we can't change and we just have to accept and try and preserve as well, you know. I think that but also to keep our own traditions and blend as much as we can. And try and speak the language. You know, one of my favourite sayings always is in Portuguese when I start talking is, my Portuguese isn't very good, but I'm going to try. And always try, because it is quite endearing to most people if you say you're at least going to try.
Absolutely.
And, you know, I don't see many Portuguese mocking foreigners when they try and talk Portuguese. They're quite encouraging, really. They're not, you know, I don't think the French would be quite so forgiving.
No, they're not, from my memory.
with some of the mistakes I've made, because I've made some corking mistakes before. I once asked the taxi driver if he'd come and wash me.
How did that happen?
I was on text, but I wanted him to pick.
Yeah.
Instead of saying levantar, I said lavar. Wash me. And I've also asked. He didn't reply. I think he thought, oh, that's a bit strange. No, he didn't reply. There's a few things like that have happened before. But so the role of a migrant, and also to contribute financially to society too. And, you know, I do know a lot of expats that work here and that earn a good living, pay tax, pay social security, and they pay towards the system. They're not just taking.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, you've been raising children here. I say it like you've raised thousands, and you've got two lovely boys. What kind of things go on psychologically as a mum raising boys in another country? Because I, from my own perspective with our three, I'm often thinking, have I done the right thing? Is this the right thing? Is being in this country where it's not their native language, is this, times 1,001 other questions, because we do tend to like to guilt ourselves up a little bit. What's it been like for you in terms of raising your boys here?
Very positive, actually. I think the oldest started not school, but preschool, the Jardim de Infância in Foz. It's a lovely little school.
It's a cute little place, isn't it?
Yeah, there's an outside play area. It's right by the beach. And within 6 months to a year, he was already fluent in Portuguese. So that definitely helps, because like when they were on the beach or when we were in a restaurant or other places, they could communicate in both tongues. And then the baby, when he was baby when we came, he's not a baby anymore. When he was 3, he started to go to preschool as well. That period where he was small was quite tricky, because in the UK, when the oldest was small, I'd go to a lot of baby groups and baby massage and baby yoga, and I had other friends with kids and things like that. That did feel a little bit isolating at first. And me and Alice, someone you also know, her twins are very similar age to my youngest. So we tried to start a baby group, and we got lots of toys donated, and we found a place. Foz Centre said that we could do it for free. We advertised it everywhere, and not one Portuguese person came. It was all foreigners that came, foreigners. And in the end, we'd go, and it was great that the kids would play, but, you know, one person might show up, or 2 people might come, or nobody. So in the end, we wound it down because we had other projects that we were doing. But that was quite tricky. It was a little bit isolated, because lots of Portuguese parents have their parents around that are very prominent in their role of taking care of the kids. And so that was a little bit isolating. But I've been very lucky that both of the boys have had very good teachers, especially in their early years, that were very patient and that were very open to the fact that they were coming from another country. And because it's not unusual that now, I think in most schools there's expat kids, whether they're English or Dutch or other nationalities. So I've been very lucky, but I don't think there's been like challenges in that sense. I actually think they're exposed to a much healthier teen lifestyle here. Now they're entering their teendom than they would have done if we'd have stayed in the UK. And, you know, my eldest is nearly 15 and alcohol hasn't cropped up really yet. And, you know, I think in the UK that would have already...
by about the age of 12 or 13, right?
yeah, exactly. And the kids just all seem really nice. Like that.
Yeah, they are.
The friends that they've got are lovely. You know, they're all, and they're mixed. There's some expats, but mostly Portuguese. And they've just rolled with it, haven't they? The kids are very in the moment, aren't they? They've just rolled with it. The eldest has said a couple of times to me he doesn't feel like he fits in with the culture of the Portuguese. But I think you will always have that as an expat. Like, even if you were 3 when you were brought here, do you know what I mean?
But I mean, that also happens in your own country as well. I mean, I've never actually felt like I fitted in my own country. I've always felt almost like a foreigner in my own family at times. And so, you know, your eldest might actually be feeling what he'd be feeling if he was in the UK. We never know, do we?
Yeah, definitely. But he only ever says it's like a passing comment.
Yeah.
Now the kids are getting older, the schooling doesn't seem to suit them as much as it did when they were younger. I think in like preschool and the early years, they focus quite a lot on creativity, and they have a lot of free time where they're playing and doing other stuff as well. My eldest is now just starting to question whether he wants to continue in like normal mainstream school or do something else. But they have had very good opportunities here that they would have never have probably had in the UK. Like through the schooling system, both of them do music, and they get, I think it's 5 hours, about 5.5 hours of music a week. Wow. So my eldest plays double bass and the youngest plays the accordion. And, you know, the youngest wouldn't have been playing the accordion if we'd have stayed in the UK.
No, I mean, that's really cool.
Yeah, and they both play football. They've both done martial arts here as well. So they've had a lot more experiences affordably than I would have had in the UK, because for the music, that's just through the school system. So I don't have to pay. The only thing you have to pay is either the rental of the instrument or you buy the instrument.
Yeah.
But all of the stuff is free. So they've been totally immersed in music, which I think is really good. Yeah. And like now my youngest finishes at 1:20 4 days a week. So he's got 4 afternoons off a week, but they do lots of extra activities as well. So he's signed up for music club, canoeing on the lagoon, and athletics as extra. So they have their formal education, which is not a full day necessarily, but they do extra activities as well. And the climate's much more geared up to them to be able to be doing more outdoor things. And so from that perspective, I don't feel like my challenge as a mother has been harder here than it would have been in the UK. I actually think it probably is the reverse. It's been easier here. I think.
Yeah. I mean, I do love when I look around at Portuguese families and children and the family experience, and then we go out and we meet other people and we hang out with other people. Things are just so much more relaxed here than I think that they would be in the UK. Yeah,
definitely. And when the kids were small, and you must get it as well because your youngest is still quite small.
Yeah.
How nice and friendly the elderly are to the children. And I remember once my youngest was crying, and I just put him in his pushchair and put the rain cover over him because it was raining, and I was paying for a coffee, and he started to cry. And when I turned round, a woman had taken the thing off him and she picked him out of his pushchair, and she was just talking to him and soothing. And can you imagine if that had happened in the UK?
Yeah.
And at one time he was a bit cranky in the supermarket queue, and the woman in front bought a little cuddly toy, paid for it, and then she gave it to us as she left. It was just little things like that. It was really a bit of an eye-opener to me. And as you probably also know, parenting seems to have got a bit competitive in the UK. It's like, but I didn't get that here. But, it was always when I went to the baby groups and parties and things like that, there always seemed to be a sense of competitiveness about who was doing the best job for their kids. And it's just very much more natural here, it seems.
Yeah, because it's about the kids, isn't it? It's about giving them the best experience rather than like getting one up on somebody else. I completely concur with what you're saying. I mean, our kids went out for the afternoon with their dad a couple of days ago and came back and they were all giggling, and Carl said, "Oh, they all got a kiss from a stranger today." The little old lady was loving them all and gave them a kiss each and like gave them a big old hug. And yeah, you just don't really get that in the UK in the same way. It takes me back almost like 30 years in the UK, how it used to be when I was growing up. And yeah.
I think you're right. Someone said to me it was because pre-revolution, infant mortality was really high. So even like in the early 70s, infant mortality was still high. So that generation remember having a lot of infant deaths. And then that's improved, obviously, massively in the last 40 years, well, 50 years. But that older generation still remember it. So they still very much hold children very, as precious because they lived through a period where lots of children died because of poverty or lack of healthcare. So I think that is still very much in the psyche of the Portuguese, and they do value family. Like on the whole, they value family very much, don't they? They look after their elders.
Yeah,
they look
do.
after their children as well. On the whole, I'm not saying everywhere, but most.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, I've seen that cousins have so that all of the parents can get to work during the summer holidays and not everyone have to take them off. I've seen like kids from one family go to stay with their auntie and uncle. And then when their auntie and uncle are going to have their time off, all the kids are over to this part of the family. And so it's like they're always shunted around and it works. Everyone's very happy helping each other. Really beautiful.
Yeah, and I think probably that will start breaking up a little bit as the young move away to find work opportunities, and the minimum wage here is not that much, so families do have to really help each other out, and paid childcare isn't really, like, you can't find a childminder here like you do in the UK, for example. But obviously a lot of parents do work, but the parents or grandparents or siblings take that slack a lot of the time. Where we're in the UK, lots of people are scattered, aren't they? They're all over the place. Like people don't tend to stick to one area anymore.
Mm. And yeah, you're right. I mean, we wouldn't want to be moving over here and then influencing their culture to make it like ours, like break up their families. One thing that I wonder about is like the net migration from Portugal, like from the Portuguese, is I think negative. You know, like more people leave than stay, and if it carries on at this kind of rate, I suspect actually the country is going to become more and more multicultural than it is Portuguese. And so there is like the opportunities are going to be completely different in say 10 years and 20 years and 30 years. Do you think this is the place where you're going to stay is like my first question. And then what about your sons? You know, when they're looking at their future, how do they feel as sort of first generation migrants? I mean, do they consider themselves like that, or do they think of themselves as Portuguese? Or
I think they consider themselves as British or English.
Yeah.
But they also consider that they know that they've lived all of their lives here. I don't think I'll ever leave Portugal. I don't think so. My partner is Portuguese and he's from this region as well, so his family are here too. But I don't think so unless things change. Like, you know, we don't know what the future holds. But let's see. But I would not want to leave. I love it here so much, and I feel like I said, I feel grounded here. It's like I feel my root is here. And I don't miss the UK at all. In fact, I get a bit panicky when I'm planning on going back. And I've only been back a handful of times in 11 years. And that's not because I don't want to see people. It's just I just don't like it. I love seeing my friends and family. But as soon as I get on a train in the UK or in a car or something like that, I just want to be back here again. And Portugal's it's not a very big country, but it's not that populated. So you feel like there's a massive sense of space here. But I feel a bit claustrophobic when I go back to the UK. Yeah. And I live quite rurally as well in the UK. It wasn't like I lived in a big city. But no, I don't think I'll ever leave unless some circumstance comes up where it's impossible to stay. And the kids, they've talked about, you know, in the future, I'd like to go and visit this country or I'd like to go there. And their opportunities are endless. You know, they're learning German, or the eldest is learning German, and they get quite a few hours of German a week. So he should have a good level when he leaves. Speaks Portuguese and English. You know, they're two of the most amazing languages in the world. So they could go to Africa, they could go to Brazil, they could go to other countries and be able to speak in Portuguese or English. So their opportunities really are probably more than mine were when I was their age, I think. My eldest son often talks about Denmark. I don't know why he wants to go to Denmark, but he often talks about Denmark. I think they just want to see where life takes them, really. And see what happens through their schooling and which direction they want to go in. They still haven't really decided like what they want to do when they're older. I tell them, you want to be happy, that's what you want to do.
Yeah, definitely. Oh man, this has been brilliant. I just got like one more question I want to ask you, and that is, would you have done anything differently? You know, in retrospect, and so this is actually two questions. And if you had any advice for people that were considering making a switch of country, like, you know, migrating to another place, what would that be?
Would I have done anything different? I don't think I would actually have done anything differently, because you can't predict what would have happened. Things differently anyway. No, I don't think so. I don't think I would have done anything differently. I think everything's worked out as it meant to. Things didn't work out quite as they meant to, because obviously, like I touched on earlier, I moved over here with the father of my children and my then fiance, and then that didn't end up continuing, and in 2017 we separated. That was very hard because I was in a country that wasn't my native land, and I didn't have all my friends and family around me to help me out or to help guide me through that process so much. So there are some regrets about obviously how that developed and how that panned out, but I can't change that. And I think for me and for the kids and for him, it was the right decision at the time. And what was the other question? Oh, any advice?
Yeah, what advice would you give?
Find a good English-speaking lawyer, because lawyers don't function here quite like they function in the UK. You need a lawyer for lots of different things. If you're earning, find a good accountant as well to guide you through the whole IRS stuff, which can be very complicated. I'd probably encourage people to get private health insurance here because it's not that expensive compared to how it is in the UK. And on the whole, the private hospitals seem to provide a better service than the national health. And I never, ever, ever thought I'd hear myself saying that because I was a proponent of the NHS.
Yeah.
And don't turn anything down. Like if someone says to you, oh, do you want to come to, we're having a party, we're doing this, or we're going to celebrate this, or we're going to do it. Just do it. You never know who you're going to meet. And, I've definitely met some very pivotal people while I've been here that have changed my direction. And I think you've just got to let go of any kind of preconceived ideas or judgments and just see where it flows, really, and not try to fight the bureaucracy because it's terribly frustrating. Sometimes raising a voice is the only way that you can get somewhere. That's what I've learned from my partner now. He's Portuguese. They solve things with raising their voice quite spectacularly. Wow. If things aren't getting done, they start. Just accept whatever comes. You're not going to change Portugal to be England in the sun, or Britain in the sun, or whatever. It's its own individual energy and vibration here, and just go with it. Don't try and fight it, I think.
Yeah.
And plan and get second opinions as well. Like, especially if you're building or if you're buying or renovating, make sure you tick all the boxes, that you've checked everything out thoroughly, and understand your position in the law, I think. Those things.
Wow. That's amazing advice. Thank you so much for taking the time to share some of your experiences in terms of your migration over here and what you've learned, and how your family has changed and evolved. I've enjoyed every moment of it, Jennie.
No, we needed longer.
Yeah, I feel like I've learned more about you as well, which is always a really lovely benefit of having these conversations. If somebody wanted to get in contact with you, if somebody was interested in having might I say, a really good, amazing, holistic person to manage their health with, how can they get hold of you? What's the best way?
Probably through the website, which is www.genius.life, or my email is on there. The contact form is in there. They can email me through there. My number's on there.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much once again, and I look forward to catching up with you real soon. Hopefully in person soon. We can have those coffees you were talking about.
Definitely. Yeah.
All right. Lots of love to you.
Okay. Bye-bye. Take care. Bye-bye.
Don't go though. So I hope you found that interesting, intriguing, inspiring, and I'm guessing it's kind of fired you up in your migration. Now, obviously, I don't know where you are in your migration right now. You might have already just moved, or you might be poised, just ready to move. And in many respects, it doesn't matter, because what I really wanted to bring about here was just this feeling that wherever you are in your migration, whatever stage you're at, there is support for you. So just to remind you, you can catch up with Jennie. If you wanted to go through any healing work with Jennie, then just go to www.genius.life. That's Genius. It's a play on words there, with Jennie and genius. So it's genius.life, and obviously she can help you when you move over. And obviously, if Carl and I can be of any assistance, go to goodmorningportugal.com. You could also go to theportugalclub.com, and you can also go to feelgoodastrology.com/migration. Anyway, so much love to you wherever you are in the world and whatever stage you're at in your migration. I hope we see you again real soon. Bye for now. you.